Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening. As I was driving down from Washington, I had the feeling that I'll be speaking tonight to myself here, because I couldn't think of anyone who would leave his home tonight and come to participate in another evening involving the Middle East or Israel. Sometimes I have a feeling that we've all had enough of that interest. But I'm glad to see that you are here. We chose also, as the chairman said, the pivotal interest that the people of this country have in Israel and the importance of Israel's role in the Middle East. A reference was made to my friend and colleague, Ambassador Ashraf Gorbal, the Egyptian ambassador, and he's right when he says that we are friends. And I don't know whether he said it, if not I will. We also have our differences of opinion. But I remember particularly when I arrived in this country in my present role nearly 2 years ago. It was before the peace treaty was signed, but after the Camp David Accords have been agreed upon. And Egyptians and Israelis began to talk to each other, something we haven't done for 30 years before. And he was the first ambassador that I met socially. Mutual friends saw to it that a few days after my arrival, we did meet with our families. And a couple of weeks later, I went to the Capitol Hill to hear the President deliver his State of the Union message to the Congress. And I felt very much like a new boy coming to a kindergarten, because I didn't know any of the ambassadors who were assembled there in the Congress and were about to be marched into the chamber of the House of Representatives. And I looked around, felt rather lonely, somewhat out of place, and then suddenly came over, put his arm around me and said, "Welcome to Washington." And who was that but my friend Ashraf Gorbal? And I thought how symbolical is the fact that the first ambassador that would receive me in my first formal appearance in Washington would be none other than the ambassador of Egypt, with which we were not yet at peace. He took me around and started introducing me to the other ambassadors, Evron, the ambassador of Israel. And the first ambassador he introduced me to was the Yugoslav ambassador, another country which has no relations with Israel. So that was my introduction to diplomatic life in Washington. But now to the serious matters at hand. No other conflict has had as much coverage as the Arab-Israeli conflict. Sometimes you have the feeling as if the media is obsessed with this conflict. Everything that happens, particularly if it's not to our credit, is immediately reported and splashed. Every negotiation is dissected. Every move that we make or do not make is analyzed. And I have yet to see other issues so widely and so deeply covered by the media. The events of the last few weeks in the Middle East have, in my view, proven a few of the myths with which we have lived for so long. I believe that this is one of the things about which Gobal and I would disagree, and about which I am certain that we are right and he is wrong. He who says that the core of the instability of the Middle East is the Palestinian problem, its solution or lack of it, is missing the point. All around us, the Middle East is seething with wars, with instability, and for once, nobody can point a finger at us and say that it is because of us, of our policies, that the events that we are watching are now taking place. The war between Iran and Iraq, two countries which are strong supporters of the PLO and bitter enemies of Israel, are fighting a deadly war against each other. And the dangers to the supply of oil to the West is today more serious than it has ever been in the last 30 years. Syria has cut off its relations with Iraq, or vice versa. Whoever took the initiative, relations are broken between the two of them. Two of the most radical countries, again, in the area. Today we heard that Saudi Arabia has cut off its relations with Libya. Not long ago, and in fact still, a war is going on in which Morocco and the irregulars and guerrillas based in Algeria are fighting each other. Syrian forces are in occupation of that tragic country, the Lebanon. Jordanian troops are moving in the direction of the Iraqi border. South Yemen and Saudi Arabia are at each other's throats. All this has got nothing whatsoever to do with whether the autonomy talks have progressed quickly enough, far enough, or not. The core of the problem in the Middle East is the instability within the Arab world, its inherent conflicts with each other. The only country which has shown a remarkable degree of stability is Israel. You never know when you invest your money, when you invest your support in a certain country there, what would happen a few years hence. It's a volatile area. Much depends on the personality of one ruler who may be disposed of with one bullet. It's not only the United States that is learning that lesson, the Soviet Union too. For a long time, Britain supported the old Libyan regime only to have it overturned. And Mr. Gaddafi has taken over with his vitriolic hatred of the West. The Soviet Union, for their part, invested a lot of effort and money and military equipment in Egypt, only to see how Sadat, when he came to power, threw them out and turned his back on them and joined or looked for the United States for help. The source of the instability, in as much the conflict between us and our neighbors is concerned, is rooted in the uniqueness of our conflict. A uniqueness which is now changing a bit with the treaty with Egypt. Because countries fight over borders, over territory. They go to war over economic interests. In our case, it's the only conflict in the world where one side sees as its objective, and only objective, the destruction, the elimination of the other side. Iraq doesn't want to see an Israel in any shape or form. The PLO, even today, even in a speech delivered yesterday at UNESCO by Yasser Arafat, sticks to its position that Israel has to be eliminated and done with. Most Arab countries still subscribe to this notion. And that is where the difficulty for seeking a solution arises from. And this has got nothing to do with the Palestinian problem. Because in fact, there is a Palestinian state in existence. Jordan is a Palestinian state. The citizens of Jordan are Palestinians. Jordan was part of the original Palestine mandate. So if one looks for a Palestinian state, there it is. There is a problem with the inhabitants in Judea and Samaria, and that's something we are trying to tackle now in negotiations with Egypt. But this I'm saying in parentheses, and I'll come to this problem later. And that was the difficulty. Because of that Arab insistence on the destruction of Israel in the past, that was the main, if not the only, obstacle to reaching an agreement over the Arab-Israeli conflict. The war of Yom Kippur, 1973, has changed that. Because if that war had proved anything, it proved that, to the Egyptians at least, that there is no military solution to the problem. That whether they liked it or not, Israel is a reality that cannot be eliminated. And that was the lesson that President Sadat drew from the war. Because there they had an opportunity of more than a lifetime. They took us by surprise. They, jointly with the Syrians, launched a war against us. We were unprepared. And yet, after 20 days or so of fighting, we were closer to Damascus and to Cairo than we were at the beginning of the war. And President Sadat rightly made the reached the correct conclusion. He realized that in order for Egypt to be able to tackle the main problems, the serious problems that he and his people were facing, he had to make peace with Israel. at the best possible terms for him, surely. And that's how the process began. And as the ambassador of Israel, I have to be bipartisan. And I'm glad to be able to be bipartisan here and say something which I've been saying in public ever since I came here, that it was initially the shuttle diplomacy of Secretary Kissinger that brought about the breakthrough that began to create the atmosphere of trust between us and Egypt. He was the one who paved the way, first through the disengagement agreements, and then the interim agreement in 1975. And it was these efforts that led to Camp David and to the signing of the peace treaty in March 1979. But it was also the efforts of President Carter, who never gave up hope and who twisted our arms occasionally, as well as Egypt, that made this achievement of peace possible. Because it was in the interest of all of us to have peace. I don't have to say why it is in our interest. Peace for us means security. This is the ideal for which we all yearn in Israel, and for which we have made great sacrifices recently. Peace is the thing that Egypt needed. And peace serves the United States' interests as well as those of the peoples of the area. So we are here in a joint venture. And we have to guard against those who are doing their utmost, even today, to undermine the peace which is just beginning to bear fruit. I remember I was then the Director General of the Foreign Ministry when in November 1977, President Sadat rather dramatically and unexpectedly announced that he was coming to Jerusalem. There were many of us, I will have to admit, who doubted the sincerity of that dramatic opening. I don't think that we doubt it any longer. His gesture was met with equal response by Prime Minister Begin. Israel has paid, so far, a heavy price for that peace, and in several areas. We are giving up the strategic depth and the security that comes with it of controlling the Sinai. We cannot forget that we had to fight 4 wars which emanated from that direction. That Egypt was the main force in all these wars against Israel. And we had to make a very serious decision. Do we trust the new Egyptian approach? Do we trust President Sadat? Is he sincere in what he is offering us? Are the risks that we are taking something that will pay off in the end, in terms of peace? Or is it something that will pave the way for another disaster? I believe that events have shown that we have made the right decision. But in the process, we have given up the only source of energy that we had. And I want to hasten to add that those oil fields that we have withdrawn from were not there when we came to the Sinai. We developed them, we discovered them, and within a couple of years they could have been sufficient in their production to provide all our energy needs. I don't have to tell this audience, at this time of energy shortage, what it means for a country to give up its only source of energy. We gave up, we are giving up, we are still in the process of withdrawing. The military establishment, the defense setups, the airfields that provided us with security. And we have undertaken, and I don't think that people, even in this country, with all the generosity that the administration and the Congress and the people of the United States have shown to us in providing aid, in direct grants and in loans to us, the crushing economic burden that we have undertaken in the process. Because far from this treaty making us lower the defense budget, lower the defense expenditure, it has forced us, at least in the short run, in the immediate future, of increasing our defense expenditures. Because we have to relocate all our military infrastructure from the Sinai to the Negev. We have to build new lines of defense, and we have to pay for the oil that we had to give up. And Israel today has an annual expenditure of close to $2.5 billion for oil. We have to spend about $6 billion on the relocation of our military setup from the Sinai to the Negev. But we are doing all this with the knowledge that the Middle East is now entered upon a new era. Because with Egypt at peace with us, it's an entirely different Middle East. It's a Middle East which can look forward to tranquility, to better stability. Can you imagine what kind of a Middle East you would have seen today in the current war if Egypt and Israel were not at peace, but rather potential enemies now? What chaos it would have brought all around. And we've undertaken also, and we intend to fulfill it, and to live up to it, to bring to the Palestinian inhabitants of Judea and Samaria and Gaza, who are under our control now, something which they haven't had throughout their history, and that's a measure of full autonomy for an interim period of 5 years, at the end of which a final settlement of the future of these areas will be decided upon in joint negotiations between us, Egypt, the representatives of those Palestinian inhabitants, and Jordan. It's not an easy task, it's not an easy goal to fulfill, because under the pressures of certain Arab states, some European countries who should have backed the United States, Egypt, and Israel in their peace efforts, try to follow or are following an easy way out, a very selfish approach, by giving in to Arab blackmail of those rejectionist countries led by Iraq who are opposed to the peace process. And the 9 countries that make up the common market in Europe have come up with proposals and suggestions that undermine and undercut the Camp David process and which make it very difficult for Egypt and for the moderate Palestinians to engage in serious negotiations. Yet I'm encouraged by what we have done so far to come to the conclusion that we shall eventually reach an agreement and a settlement of this issue too, and simply for one reason: there is no alternative to it. The alternative that the European countries are putting forward, if we accept it, means that we shall have to agree in our own self-destruction. There is no way Israel will ever agree to that. There is a need to find some form of autonomy and a direction for future fulfillment for the Palestinian Arabs who live in Judea and Samaria. And the only way they can get it is through the autonomy talks. The PLO road leads to war, destruction, first of all for them. And we are not ready to become sacrificial lambs for short-term gains for some European countries. So I am convinced that eventually all parties will realize the reality. And just as President Sadat made that historic decision in 1977 and has never had any reason to regret it, so the other parties to the conflict will face the realities and seek a compromise with which we too can agree and live with. And I thank you for listening for something which you may have heard before, and I'm ready to answer any questions because, like you, I want to leave at 8:15 here. And I thank you